Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 471. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. I got a lot of news about the war in Ukraine on today's show, so I want to jump right into it. Just a quick reminder that to put out the show, share it around if you can. It's on YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version. Please subscribe there. If you want just audio only, it's up anywhere you can listen to podcasts. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and we repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. Of course, the Institute and antiwar.com is where I write nearly every day now, so head on over to either of those sites to make sure you're keeping up with everything I'm writing. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter now for social media. If you want to add me on Facebook, go ahead. If we have mutuals, I'll accept you. If we don't have many mutuals, just send me a message to let me know that you're a real person and not a bot, and I'll add you on Facebook. On Instagram, I'm Kyle Anzalone, just my name, and then 3. And on Twitter, it's Kyle Anzalone _. So whatever your favorite is, follow me there. And if you ever have any recommendations on stories either that I could write or I should be covering on the show, send them along. I don't do many guests on the show. I'm always open to guest suggestions, but just if you send me something and I don't take you up on it, doesn't mean I don't like you or I don't like the person. I just only interview a very select group of people, in part because I don't think I'm that good at interviewing people. So let's get into the news today. First story here is really a follow-up to the last show where we discussed this situation where there's this book by, I think it's Walter Isaacson is the guy's name, and he's doing a biography of Elon Musk. He put out an advanced copy of that, or gave Astoria a portion of that book to CNN, and within that, it seems that Isaacson made a significant mistake, and this mistake has really festered in, the American discourse on the issue. And so what Isaacson said was that Ukraine was launching an attack on Russia, and Elon Musk disabled Starlink to prevent that attack. And as we went over very thoroughly on the last show, that isn't what happened. What happened is that Ukraine was in the process of sending under some kind of submersible drone that was loaded with explosives, and they were trying to hit the Russian fleet at Sevastopol. Now, from all the accounts, there was no Starlink access to the Crimean Peninsula, and so apparently when Kiev realized this, they made an emergency request to SpaceX to activate Starlink to go all the way there, which Starlink denied. Now, this is really important, and I think I'm one of the few people who have actually bothered to look at the Starlink terms of service and kind of figure out if what Elon did was consistent with Starlink policy, and then why SpaceX Starlink policy is what it is. And so if you actually look at the terms of service, they very explicitly say that Starlink is not intended for military purposes, particularly in offensive attacks. And so since the start of the war, Starlink has been used by the Ukrainian military, but it's so that Kiev can communicate with send actual messages, not have drones. And in fact, there was a point in the war where I think they were either modifying Starlink systems to use them with drones, and SpaceX took measures to prevent that from happening in the further future. And part of the reason is to export weapons, there's very specific controls on that in the U.S. government. And so if you're selling items overseas and another country is turning them into a weapon, or, in SpaceX's case, giving away these services, giving away Starlink nodes and stuff like that to Ukraine, and then they're using them for weapons, then you could run into the problem of violating the Weapons Arms Export Control Act and other American laws. And so that really is the situation, that Ukraine was carrying out an attack. At the last minute, they reached out to SpaceX, and SpaceX upheld company policy and U.S. law and chose not to, further activate Starlink, which Musk, thinks he would have invited retaliation against himself from Russia, which is probably true for doing so, but also could have violated the law. And from Elon Musk's perspective, he doesn't want to escalate the war. He wants this thing to end. He's it seems to be legitimately upset by the level of killing going on in this war. So all that is the background for this story we have here from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, September 12th. Dave's back at antiwar.com. Huge congrats to Dave and his wife Allison on the baby. And glad he's back working, because, man, that guy does a lot. And it was a lot trying to partially fill in for him for a few days. So here we go. Senator Warren calls for a probe into Musk preventing attack on Russian fleet. Senator Elizabeth Warren has called for an investigation into SpaceX CEO Elon Musk after it was revealed he declined to activate his satellite internet services Starlink for an Ukrainian attack on the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Crimea. The incident took place in September 22 and was revealed by excerpts from a new biography of Musk. According to Musk, Ukraine made an emergency request to activate Starlink near Sevastopol, Crimea, and the clear implication was that it was for an attack on Russian warships. He declined the request over fears of escalating the war. Warren said Congress needs to investigate what happened here, whether we have adequate tools to make sure foreign policy is constructed by the governments and not by one billionaire. And again, this is congressional policy that Musk was following here. He was following the Arms Export Control Act and other laws by making this decision. And so this is absolutely disgusting on Elizabeth Warren's part. My guess is that she's just kind of stupid and really hates billionaires. But she also is kind of a war lover, although she is at times a more skeptical member of on Congress on some of the more hawkish issues. So, you know, this is really disappointing that she's leading the charge here. You at least think she'd keep her mouth shut, but unfortunately that's not the case. So Ukrainian officials have slammed Musk for disrupting a planned attack on Russia's fleet. Musk said Starlink was never intended to be used for war, or although his company began shipping thousands of terminals to Ukraine shortly after Russia invaded in 2022. After the time of the incident, SpaceX was providing Starlink services to Ukraine on its own and was not under any contract with the U.S. military. But since the military began footing the bill for Ukraine's Starlink service and entered into a contract with SpaceX, which the details of have not been disclosed. Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall said Monday that the September 22 incident raised concerns within the Pentagon about the need to be more specific when it comes to contracting services from companies like SpaceX. If we're going to rely on commercial architectures or commercial systems for operational use, then we have to have assurances that they're going to be available. And again, you know, the just the narrative coming out of the media and the U.S. government on this is completely absurd and backwards. All right, next up, major escalation here. Blinken says U.S. not opposed to Ukraine targeting Russian territory with U.S.-provided missiles. So we have our Secretary of State here, supposed to be America's top diplomat, probably the guy that should be talking with the Russian foreign minister and trying to see what issues that Russia and the West, including Ukraine, can come to terms on, and where, you know, maybe there could be some, even if there are still a lot of roadblocks to getting a deal done, constantly putting out, not constantly, but occasionally putting out feelers and trying to find things that both sides agree on could be very, very beneficial, but that's not happening at all. So Secretary of State Blinken said Sunday that it was up to Ukraine whether or not to target Russian territory with U.S.-provided weapons, a policy that brings the U.S. and Russia closer to a direct clash. Blinken made the comments after a ABC News report that it was likely that the Biden administration will soon arm Ukraine with Army tactical missile systems. These are ATACMS, which have a range of up to 190 miles and are fired from the HIMARS launchers that the U.S. already provided Ukraine. While appearing on ABC's This Week, Blinken was asked if he was okay with Ukraine using ATACMS to hit targets deep inside Russian territory. And he said, in terms of targeting decisions, it's their decision, not ours. But this is incredibly stupid, because if you're giving them weapons and they're saying we're going to hit Russia with them, then you could, you know, it is your decision as well. Additionally, the U.S. is providing Ukraine with a lot of targeting assistance, and so you do have to wonder if, you know, they're not playing a bigger role. It's not just like we hand the Ukraine these missiles. They, pit their own targets and they go and shoot them and they really don't inform the U.S. along the way. I bet the U.S. has an awful lot to say over what targets actually get pit to be targeted or not. So this is very, very concerning here. All right, next up, Milley says time is running out for Ukraine's counteroffensive. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, said Sunday that Ukraine's counteroffensive could have only 30 to 45 days left before it's hindered by weather. There is still a reasonable amount of time, probably 30 to 45 days worth of fighting weather left, so the Ukrainians aren't done. There are battles not done. They haven't finished the fighting part of what they're trying to accomplish. He said it was still too early to tell if the counteroffensive had failed and claimed Ukrainian forces were, and this is a quote from Milley, pressing at a very steady pace through the Russian front lines. But since the assault was launched in early June, Ukrainians have not regained a significant amount of territory. And if anybody looks at the map, I would call it as an extremely insignificant amount of territory that Ukraine has reclaimed in these past 3 months, especially when you consider the amount of losses Ukraine sustained in that time. So U.S. officials speaking anonymously have been more candid about Ukraine's faltering counteroffensive, with some telling the Washington Post that U.S. intelligence has determined Ukraine will fail to meet its main objective of severing Russia's land bridge to Crimea. Last month, Newsweek reported that Ukrainian leadership were divided on how to move forward in light of the faltering counteroffensive. Some officials want to consolidate small gains while they've made to prepare for an expanded Russian offensive this winter, while others want to press on. Since the Newsweek report was published, Ukrainian forces have continued to launch attacks across the front, taking heavy losses. Milley told the BBC, "I said something at the very beginning of this that was going to be long, slow, hard, and high casualty producing, and that's exactly what it is." And how willing the West is to admit that Ukraine is taking massive casualties here is absolutely absurd, and how little attention that is drawn from the Western media is very disappointing. That we are really forcing the Ukrainians to just throw their men into the meat grinder, and we have almost no discussion about it on the US. All right, so next up here, I wrote this for the Libertarian Institute on September 11th. Kim traveling to Russia to meet Putin as U.S. threatens response. So I do believe, I saw some videos and stuff, that the North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un has traveled by train to Eastern Russia, and he's meeting with Vladimir Putin. I think they, shook hands already. It was official state business. I don't know if they've had their real closed door meeting yet, but Washington is threatening to increase sanctions on Pyongyang in response to increased ties between Russia and North Korea. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, described the meeting as a full state visit. He said there will be talks between two delegations, and after that, if necessary, the leaders will communicate in a one-on-one format. We will continue to strengthen our friendship. The leaders will meet in Vladivostok, South Korea. Says Kim is currently traveling by train. He has this armored train that he travels by. The U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said Washington plans to respond aggressively. This is a quote from Miller. "I will remind both countries that any transfer of arms from North Korea to Russia will be a violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. We, of course, have aggressively enforced our sanctions against entities that fund Russia's war effort, and we will continue to enforce those sanctions and not hesitate to impose new sanctions if appropriate. However, it's unclear what new sanctions the U.S. could place on North Korea that would further isolate Pyongyang. The Treasury Department has already placed thousands of penalties against North Korean officials, government offices, and industries on different blacklists. The New York Times report Kim is expected to agree to supply weapons, including artillery shells, to Russia. A National Security Council spokeswoman, this is Watson, demanded that the North Korean leader not discuss the issue with his Russian counterpart. "We urge North Korea to cease arms negotiations with Russia and abide by the public comments that Pyongyang made not to provide or sell arms to Russia," she said. Pyongyang is believed to have a significant stockpile of shells and production capacity. On the Ukrainian battlefield, artillery has become crucial. Western countries have begun to run out of 155 millimeter rounds to send Ukraine, prompting President Joe Biden to provide Ukraine with cluster munitions to cover the shortage. Currently, NATO states are producing less artillery than Ukraine is using. With Ukraine's counteroffensive stalled, the war appears likely to draw on to the foreseeable future. In July, Russian Defense Minister Shigao traveled to North Korea to meet with Kim. The South Korean intelligence claims that Moscow offered to allow Pyongyang to participate in trilateral war games with Beijing and Moscow. Washington's sanctions campaigns against several states are becoming counter-effective. The U.S. is currently attempting to smash the governments of Russia, Afghanistan, North Korea, Syria, Nicaragua, Iran, and Venezuela through economic warfare. Dang, I forgot to put Cuba on that list. It was quite long already, though. However, in response, those countries have increasingly engaged in non-dollar trade to bypass American sanctions. Additionally, other countries such as China, India, and Brazil have become willing to ignore the Treasury Department's blacklist and trade with sanctioned nations. And this is something that I have talked about for a long time on this show, and I've really covered it, especially over the past I would say year now, probably a year and a half, really since the start of the sanctions campaign against Russia, where it's like, it almost tipped the scales a little bit, where now there's so much of the world economy, so much commerce and commodity goods like oil that are sanctioned. And, you're not supposed to buy or trade with these countries, that it's actually become, more, I think, economically beneficial for a lot of countries to look at the situation and say, well, if we have to choose between being sanctioned by the West, being isolated by the West, and trading with Russia, China, and others, or trading with the West, then we're going to get a better deal with Russia, China, and others, and we're going to trade with those countries in spite of the Western sanctions. So, and that's really important to note. Next up here, Putin says Trump won't change U.S. foreign policy. Now, Putin made these comments at the Eastern Economic Forum, which is where he met with Kim as well. So Putin does not believe former President Donald Trump could end the war in Ukraine if he was reelected. Trump has slammed President Joe Biden for allowing the war in Ukraine to spiral out of control and has promised to end the conflict within days of taking office if he's reelected. So this is what Putin said. I think there will be no fundamental changes regarding Russia and U.S. foreign policy no matter who is elected president. Mr. Trump says he will solve acute problems, including the Ukraine crisis, in a few days. This can only please. Nevertheless, he too imposed sanctions on Russia during his presidency. During his first presidential run and as president, Trump was routinely attacked by U.S. government, intelligence agencies, mainstream media, and his political rivals on both sides of the aisle as being a witting or unwitting agent of Putin. However, the central claims of the Russiagate hoax have now been thoroughly debunked. Still, the false narrative remains a prominent talking point in American politics. Additionally, as president, Trump did not adopt policies favorable towards Russia. As Putin observed, Trump issued multiple rounds of sanctions on Russia, including for false scandals such as Russiagate and the Skripal poisoning. Trump also provided Ukrainian forces with lethal weapons, a step President Barack Obama refused to take. While Biden would go on to ship tens of billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine, the initial tranches of Javelin missiles were authorized by President Trump. The former president promised to bring a quick end to the war in Ukraine if he is reelected. This is Trump's quote: "If I were president, I would end that war in one day. It'll take 24 hours. I will get it ended. It will be easy." That deal would be easy. A lot of it has to do with money. The war has to be stopped. It's a disaster. While Trump assesses the impasse in Ukraine is due to money, Moscow and Kiev have overlapping territorial claims that both sides say are non-negotiable. Putin went on to say that the treatment of Trump under the Biden administration shows America is moving away from its democratic system. As for the prosecution of Trump, for us, what is happening in today's condition, in my opinion, is good because it shows the rottenness of the American political system, which cannot pretend to teach other states democracy. He added, everything that is happening with Trump, it's prosecution of a political rival for political reasons. That's what it is, and it is being done in front of the public of the United States and the whole world. Now, that is kind of the part of Putin's statement that has gotten a lot of attention. I thought actually the part where he basically took Trump's maybe biggest campaign issue that he has made so far with Biden, that being the war in Ukraine, and basically saying that Trump won't do anything about it, was really notable and really important. And yet nobody wants to bring that up because, of course, the narrative around Trump and Putin is always that, oh, these two people are best buddies, they love each other. And so when Putin comes out and says that the persecution of Trump is political, and that's all it is, everybody jumps all over and say, oh, look, Putin's standing up for Trump. Well, if you look actually at the sentence before, Putin is saying that this is a good thing because it exposes how rotten America is, and how can, this country be a democracy if it's, prosecuting the political candidate that's the main rival to the sitting president. Now, I wrap up here by just saying that the Biden administration has made similar accusations against Putin for his treatment of Alexei Navalny. However, Navalny is a marginal political figure in Russia, while Trump is the leading Republican presidential candidate in the primary race. Additionally, Navalny has explicitly called for violence to be used against Russia's minority Muslim population. And I'm not trying to say that Trump hasn't said any controversial things, but he's never called America's Muslim population or Mexican or black population, whatever you think Trump hates the most, cockroaches, and suggested that they be exterminated as Navalny has. All right, another article that I wrote here for the Institute: Zelensky blames the West for the failed counteroffensive. President Zelensky said his Western backers failed to supply Ukraine with weapons in a timely manner, allowing Russia to build up its defensives. The delay is responsible for Ukraine's lack of progress during its 3-month-long counteroffensive. In an interview with CNN's Fareed Zakaria that was published on Sunday, Zelensky explained, we waited too long. It's true. Now, no, I'm thankful to our partners, to the United States, EU, other partners. I'm thankful very much to President Biden and to Congress. But we have to understand, we waited too long. They put mines. He added that Western arms often do not arrive in Kiev for some time after Western nations announce they plan to provide weapons. And I know Zelensky's statement here is a little bit confusing, but basically what he's saying is the announcement comes and then it takes a little bit of time, or not a little bit, a significant amount of time before the weapons actually arrive. He said, then we have been ready from the point of view of our partners because the decision to give us, for example, Bradley fighting vehicles and other weapons, the decision, it doesn't mean the results. And so the results would be delivering the weapons, which isn't happening. And, yeah, so that's the delay. In a recently released assessment of Ukraine's military from February, the former defense minister, Reznikov, believes his army only had supplies for 2 to 2.5 months of fighting remaining in Kiev stockpiles. Our army would have been physically exhausted, Reznikov reported. In March, the New York Times reported that Washington was helping Kiev with war games for counteroffensive that was likely to focus on Russian-held territory in southern Ukraine. Those military operations kicked off in June. By then, Russia had several lines of well-fortified defenses secured with minefields. When asked about the conditions of the counteroffensive in late March, Zelensky shot down the idea of launching the counteroffensive. He said that Ukraine can't start yet and can't send our brave soldiers into the front lines without tanks, artillery, and other long-range rockets. The Ukrainian leader expressed that view again in May. He said, we can advance with what we've got, and I think it will be successful, but we will lose a lot of people, and I think that's unacceptable. We still need to wait. We need a bit more time. He added that they will reinforce our counteroffensive, and most importantly, they will protect our people. We are expecting armored vehicle. They will arrive in batches. So I'm not exactly trying to point out here that Zelensky is necessarily right. However, the whole thing is very interesting that there's a lot of assessments coming from February, we had the one that was released through the Discord leads, saying that the U.S. didn't think it would be successful, and then particularly when we get into like late spring, May, June, we have American and Ukrainian officials saying that they don't think this counteroffensive is going to be successful, and yet Washington pushed Kiev to do it anyways. All right. Next up here, some more confusion on trying to figure out when American F-16s will reach Ukraine. Several American officials have explained that the advanced American warplanes are unlikely to impact the war in Ukraine until years in the future. However, Ukraine is hoping to deploy the weapons this winter. So this is Air Force Vice Chief of Staff General Alvin, and General Alvin is, I believe, expected, or he either was nominated by Biden to become the Air Force Chief of Staff, or is expected to receive that nomination shortly. And he said in regards to the F-16s, as our Air Force, we are effective if we are part of a joint force. The value of F-16s will be in the longer term, which is when it's better integrated with a larger Ukrainian military. He added, we understand through our success in air power and air superiority, it is not just the platform, but is the training, and that training is not just on the platform, but is integrated with the command and control elements, the integration with the joint force. Last month, General James Hecker explained that Ukraine's inexperienced pilots will have to go through several phases of training. They're young pilots that barely have any hours at all, so they're not currently fighting the war, and they are going to get them a little bit more training on propellers. And then you go down to France and fly the Dornier Alpha jets for a little bit. All that's going to take time, and that's probably not going to happen before the end of the year. So it takes a little while to make it happen. So that's why it's going to be at least until next year until you see F-16s in Ukraine. And he, stresses right there that at least next year. And so what he's saying is that, look, these Ukrainian pilots that we're going to train, we had to fly them on propeller planes first, and then we'll get them flying on jets. And so they're not even necessarily ready to like hop in the F-16 and start training. They got to train on other planes first. While Hecker believes F-16s could see the battlefield next year, he stressed it will take years for them to have an impact. You can get proficient on a weapon system fairly quickly. It takes a while to build up a couple of squadrons of F-16s to get their readiness high enough and their proficiency high enough. This could be 4 or 5 years down the road, he explained. The general added that once the advanced warplanes are operating at its potential, it will not be a war-altering weapon. The F-16s are not going to be a silver bullet that all of a sudden they're going to start taking down S-400s because they have S-16s. And the S-400s are Russia's long-range air defense systems. Still, Ukrainian officials appear to have a more optimistic timeline for the F-16. The Wall Street Journal reports that Ukrainian officials now say they could have pilots trained by February. Ukrainian officials now believe that which American training is expected to begin this month or next, a handful of Ukrainian fighter pilots could be as ready to go as ready as February. The U.S. could train experienced English proficient pilots in as little as 5 months, a group of likely fewer than 10 pilots for now. And so again, as with the European training program, you have problem number one is that the group of pilots they're training is very small, and so that seems like it's going to be an issue, especially as what you have Hecker saying, you need squadrons of these things to really make them proficient on the battlefield. But in addition to that, maybe that Wall Street Journal report should have looked, and maybe the Ukrainians need to look more to what Hecker is saying, because I believe the European program, they're going to spend like 4 months training maybe more experienced pilots, it sounded like to me, but in English first before they really start training on the jets, where the American program, at least from what the General Hecker was saying, it sounds like they're more inexperienced pilots that understand English better, so maybe they don't need English training, but they need more flight training than the other pilots. So The timeline for F-16s reaching Ukraine is still unclear. In the early months of the war, President Biden insisted that sending advanced warplanes to Ukraine was off the table. However, he relented to pressure earlier this year and agreed to allow American allies to pledge to send about 60 F-16s to Ukraine. Before the planes can hit the battlefield, Ukrainian pilots must be trained. The pilots have to become proficient in English prior to training. The combined process is expected to take nearly a year, meaning American officials believe the first Ukrainian pilots will be trained for combat sometime next summer. The training program inside the U.S. is expected to start sometime this month. Moscow views the F-16s as a significant escalation in support for Kiev by the West. F-16s are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said the platform's strategic capability will force the Kremlin to respond. Not sure what that response is going to be. I do expect Russia to try to make a very loud response, though. All right, so now we have Sweden considering arming Ukraine with Gripen fighter jets. Swedish public radio reported Tuesday that Sweden is considering sending arming Ukraine with Gripen fighter jets, which are made by the Swedish firm Saab AB. Sweden has previously ruled out sending Gripens to Ukraine over concerns that its military could not spare them, according to the radio report. Before handing over the jets, the Swedish government wants to know how giving Gripens to Ukraine would affect Sweden's defense capabilities and how long it would take to replace them. Ukraine wants Sweden to provide one division of Gripens, which consists of 16 to 18 jets. Any plan to provide Ukraine with Gripens would involve training Ukrainian pilots, meaning the jets wouldn't see combat until at least late 2024. Ukraine has long sought Gripens and other Western-made fighter jets. So far, Kiev has been promised F-16s, and Ukrainian pilots are currently being trained on the U.S.-made planes, which won't be completed until next year. U.S. officials have stressed that the benefits of F-16s will be in the long term. So I'm not sure how difficult it is going to be able to maintain the Gripens. You know, if you already have the F-16s, it may be redundant and make, add some logistical problems to trying to maintain both platforms rather than just the one, even if the Gripens are a little bit simpler than the F-16s. All right, so Poland approves the framework to purchase the HIMARS from the U.S. Now, this was announced back in February by the State Department, a $10 billion purchase. Poland is saying that they expect to get these in 2025. And I really want to go over, I thought the interesting thing here was they're only buying 18 complete HIMARS, and then they're buying, I think, 468 launchers for the HIMARS, and so it looks like they're going to put those on domestically produced carriers. And additionally, the U.S. is going to provide Poland with the technology to take their HIMARS systems and make their own munitions for them. I'm not sure which weapons, if it's going to be the 50-mile range rockets or the ATACMS, which have a range of up to 200 miles, or if it's going to be all of them. But this is a part of Poland's massive military buildup. They want to have one of, if not the strongest land army in Europe. So, two stories left here. First is Stoltenberg acknowledges Putin invaded Ukraine over NATO expansion. This, of course, we talked about a lot on the show, but just hearing this come from Stoltenberg was easy. Not easy. It is really important to note that, this is NATO admitting that the war was fought because of NATO expansion. This is Stoltenberg's comment. The background was that President Putin declared in autumn of 2021 and actually sent a draft treaty that they wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was sent. That is what he sent to us and was a precondition for not invading Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. And so just, how dismissive American and NATO officials are. Of course, we would never agree to never expand NATO right up to Russia's border. And they say it as maybe a point to support their war effort, but really it sounds like there was a really easy off-ramp here that for some reason they explicitly chose not to take. And so that's why when people say the war was absolutely provoked, the war was absolutely provoked, and this is just great evidence of this. So Last up here, NATO says no risk of Romania being dragged into Russia-Ukraine war. This is the NATO Deputy General Secretary General saying that there was no risk that NATO member Romania would be dragged into the Russia-Ukraine war after Bucharest said drone fragments were found on Romanian territory. This is something I covered last week. Romania was insisted that, look, like, there wasn't a threat here, that this wasn't an issue, although there were some parties, including Kiev, that really did try to make it an issue. So good to see that NATO is at least trying to not play this up. It's still unclear of what actually happened in the incident. There was an attack going on the other side of the river, which is Ukrainian territory, and then within Romania they found some drone fragments. They found what appears to be evidence of, I wouldn't say an explosion, but a fire. And it's, I guess not even particularly clear if the two are related or if the drone fragments were from the battle that was just occurring. Lots of questions. It could have also been the Ukrainian drone and not a Russian one. But, that will, I guess, get addressed probably in the coming days. Although, Romania downplaying all of this is, and NATO downplaying all this is really important and does suggest that it is not going to escalate. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Back with more shows later in the week, including Connor Freeman will be back.